Okay, so this is a training to go over how to install new firmware for the iDynamo6. The first thing you need to do is you need to make sure you have this reader config application here installed. If you don't, you can go to the Apple Store and install it. The next thing you need to do is make sure that you have the firmware downloaded from SALIDO. So if you do not have the firmware already, please talk to your account manager and they can share that firmware with you. There's two different firmware based off of the card reader. There's firmware for the Lightning and firmware for the USB-C. So the Lightning will end in N as in Nancy 0, and the USB-C firmware will end in H as in Harry 0. So those are the two firmwares. This is a Lightning iPad, so we're going to go over installing the Lightning firmware. The workflow is the same for both, and it's relatively straightforward. So I've already downloaded the firmware, so I'm just going to boot up the reader application. Start from scratch here. So when you first pull up the app, you're going to be presented with a login screen. You do not need to log in. You do not need to create an account. You can use public account to do this work. So you just hit use public account. From there, you need to make sure that the application is set to iDynamo6. So you're going to click admin. And then you'll see there's four menus. You just choose card reader. And you'll locate iDynamo6, which you can see is the last card reader in the list here, and I have it checked off on the right-hand side. So I'm good to go here. I can go back to the screen, and now I need to go to the transactions menu, which is at the very top. I click transactions, and you can see I have quite a few menus here. So if you ever need to change configuration or EMV tags, that's where those are, but we're only interested in firmware today. So we're going to click update firmware. It's going to take a second, and it's going to read your firmware. So you can see it's getting info now, and now it's pulled in my firmware. Now my card reader is already up to date on the firmware, but more than likely, if you're watching this video, you're probably on older firmware. It's probably M0, M as in Mary, or F0, F as in Foxtrot. So those are most likely the two firmwares that you're using. If you're on Lightning, if you're on USB-C, you're going to see G as in Gary is most likely your old firmware. From there, all you have to do is click update firmware, and it's going to pull up a list of firmware that you can download from. And you can see the firmware that I need to install is right here in N0. And then once you do that, it's going to start installing it. And it'll bring up a dialog box, and it'll tell you what percentage of completion is done. And once it's finished with that, it'll repopulate the information here and show you that your firmware is N0. My firmware is already up to date, so I can't show that process. It takes about 2 to 3 minutes in total, and you will see your firmware update here from your old firmware to N0 if it's Lightning, or H0 if it is a USB-C reader. You want to make sure that you're using the proper firmware for the proper card reader. So if you're not sure, just check the connector on the card reader and confirm that it is either Lightning or USB-C. If you put the wrong firmware on the card reader, it can permanently break the card reader. So you want to avoid that. Make sure you know which reader you're installing on first. But that's all there is to it. After that, you should be able to log into SALIDO. You should not see a card reader light pop up, and you should be good to go to start taking payments right after that. If you have any other questions, please refer to the accompanying training document or reach out to your account manager or the support team.